works as an illustrator and author. You know, you do one project, you write and illustrate one story, and maybe you table that one for a little while, or like I did, you send it out on submission and then you start working on the next one. So this particular story is about a stuffed animal rabbit that gets left behind at the zoo, and he gets into all sorts of trouble with the animals there. That's a really great story about kind of how to deal with your emotions, which as kids, I think is always something, you know, that's important to know. And as adults too, frankly, right now, I think I've had so many discussions with my adult friends just about, you know, like it's okay to feel grief. It's okay to, frankly, do the opposite of that, which is something that I've kind of struggled with, you know, that I do look for the silver lining, and there's maybe a little bit of guilt associated with, okay, I can still come here and be happy about the work that I'm getting done.
I love art, and I hate my phone.
Hello and welcome to the Mainframes, where we take a dive into the lives of artists working out of Mainframe Studios. I'm here today with illustrator Claire Sedovic. Thank you for joining me today, Claire.
Hey Sabrina, thanks so much for having me today and taking your time to do this.
First, tell me a little bit about what life looks like for you right now. Are you getting into the studio much? I see you're there now.
Yeah, so life actually this week changed a little bit. I'm back at one of my part-time jobs working at another studio, Mowgli, downtown on 11th and Cherry. But prior to that, when I was furloughed from that job and my job as a yoga instructor, which is still not back yet, but without those two, I was actually able to spend a lot more time here at Mainframe. So this week I'm definitely missing that, but of course I can still get here in the evenings as I am now. So it was a good amount of time for me for a couple weeks there, more than a couple weeks, probably almost 5 weeks actually. For me, I'm always the kind of person to look for the silver lining in a situation, and I had my rough days, of course, as does everyone, especially now, but yeah, I try to be productive throughout it, so.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about your practice? I know you primarily illustrate children's books, and you're working on a pretty big project right now, so why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
So I followed up on a book that came out last spring, which was my debut book as an illustrator, which is Odd Animal ABCs. And with that, I noticed in general the illustrator and writer community, particularly for children's books, on Instagram where I'm active, just was putting forth a lot of really great resources for the parents and teachers around the country that, you know, suddenly had to educate their own children and keep them busy and occupied throughout the day. And these writers and illustrators were coming up with really fun content. And an organization that I'm involved in actually had a call for submissions of stuff that you wanted to share. And I started a video series that I came here every day to do. So that was really great motivation to get out of my house and get here and get some work done. So that video series is done now. It's a little bit over 26 days. It was supposed to be 26 because it was for every letter of the alphabet. I did a demo showing how to draw each of the odd animals from A to Z. And you got to learn a few facts about those animals along the way. And for me, it was just a really great learning curve because, like I said, I'm active on Instagram, but I'd never done video on there before. So they're very much home videos, but you know, I learned a lot while doing it. So that was one consistent project that had to do with a previous project, a previous book. On the wall beside me here, some people, if they've been in my studio, may have seen this particular story, which is one that I've both written and illustrated. I sent that out on submission to an editor, I guess probably the week that I lost both of my jobs. So that was at least one high point that I could, you know, look at like checking that off the list and feel good about. And then I started on a new story, which has kind of honestly been the bulk of my work for the past 4 or 5 weeks. So that's something entirely different than what's on the wall beside me here, and soon we'll be up on that wall.
Yeah, and this new project, this is sort of a dive into writing as well as illustrating, yeah?
Yeah, so this will be the second book that I've written and illustrated, and that doesn't mean that the first one, you know, has been published yet. You know, it certainly has legs. It's a really long journey to get to that point of publication. But along the way, really the way it works as an illustrator and author, you know, you do one project, you write and illustrate one story, and maybe you table that one for a little while, or like I did, you send it out on submission and then you start working on the next one. So that concentrated time that I've had here was a really great impetus to get that new story started. And I'm the kind of person that I think for me, my solace and my sanity was coming here to work and having something to do. And I think that's kind of the beauty of narrative artwork in particular, was that the hardest part, I think, for writing any sort of book, whether it's a children's book or maybe you write novels for adults, it's just that initial planning, right? Once you have, for me, it's actually, storyboard, little thumbnail pictures that I've sketched of what I want to happen on each page and each scene. Once I have that done, then it's so much easier to say, okay, I'm gonna go to Mainframe each day, I'm gonna sit down for X amount of hours, and I'm gonna draw, pages 2 and 3 or 4 and 5. Didn't always do it in order, but having that plan and that thing to go back to every day and see that grow has been really, really rewarding.
How do you feel like the routine of being able to work regularly and sort of the fulfillment of the creative process maybe helped you get through some of the difficult months that we've all been faced with recently?
The narrative art being something that's consistent to come back to each time, because one thing builds upon the next. So it's just, you lose that time that I'm sure all of us artists spend staring at the blank page or the blank Word document thinking, what do I write? What do I draw? And I already have that plan, so that that kind of time in between where maybe your thoughts just wander to, not happy thoughts. I kind of was able during the middle of the day, at least, just to ignore that entirely and come here and be focused. And that's the same thing with routine too. It's not just the work itself, but the place, right? I feel really fortunate that Mainframe has remained open for us artists. I'm happy to work at home. I do a lot of my artwork at home, frankly, but I'm good doing that in the morning. And then by the afternoon, maybe you feel the same way. I'm stir crazy and I need to get out of my apartment. And I know not everybody has the ability to do that, especially now. So to come here and kind of refocus and recharge was a lifesaver, honestly.
Tell me about the project, the new project. I know the working title is A Hug for Theodore.
So this is one, it's an idea that's been percolating in the back of my head for probably months at a time. That's usually how it works for me. And as a visual person, again, maybe you feel the same way. When I come up with an idea for a story, it's usually in the form of a particular illustration that I think I want to draw this scene. And then from there, I kind of start to carve out what the narrative is going to be and what the words are going to sound like. So this particular story is about a stuffed animal rabbit that gets left behind at the zoo, and he gets into all sorts of trouble with the animals there. Some elephants, some flamingos, really huggable boa constrictor, a really grumpy Galapagos tortoise, all sorts of animals. And at the end of the day, Theodore just wants to be loved and he wants to be hugged. So there's a surprise ending with an animal at the end of that. And yeah, it's a long process for any sort of book that you're illustrating. And I'm proud of the work that I've done so far, but again, it's just the first pass through it. So come back a year from now and I'm sure it'll be, the same story, but very much changed from that point. So it's a good start at least.
I'm noticing a little bit of a theme. You did Odd Animal ABCs, A Hug for Theodore, also based in a zoo. So is drawing animals something that's really particular to your practice? Do you really enjoy that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I actually do have a binder at home full of drawings that I did as a kid. I've kind of culled them over the years, so it's a little bit curated, but a lot of them are animals. So that's definitely always been an interest for me. I think if I really consider it, a lot of the children's books that I love and are on the shelf behind me here have animals as main characters. And honestly, I definitely stretch myself as an artist, or I try to, as we all do. But I think kids are easier to draw than adults, but drawing people sometimes is harder for me. And again, it's something I want to improve on, but animals maybe are, in a sense, a little bit more enjoyable because it just comes more naturally to me. Marcella's Butterfly, the other book on the wall beside me here, is definitely more human oriented aside from the butterfly. But yeah, with Odd Animal ABCs, I think that definitely started something and started a particular style of drawing animals for me that just worked. And again, it's changed a little bit since that book came out last April, but something that I'm still continuing with, definitely.
You have this lovely illustration that you sent me of the little girl from A Hug for Theodore, surrounded by all of these stuffed animals. And how is the process of drawing stuffed animals different than the process of drawing actual animals for you?
It was hard, and it's something, again, that I'm still working on. I have to have like a photograph for reference. So I've done a lot of Googling of stuffed animals and some very specific Google searches for, stuffed animal like octopus and stuff, if you've seen that image. But it's something that evolved over the past, I guess when I really started Hug for Theodore, just dabbling in it was probably back in like February. So if you consider like 2-ish months of working on this, from that very start of drawing like Theodore, for example, who's a stuffed animal rabbit, that's evolved in and of itself on how I've drawn him, which is something that makes it hard to illustrate narrative art because you have to have that element of consistency throughout. So to answer your question more specifically, I think the things that I was realizing made a difference. Maybe it's like the seam up the side of the animal. It doesn't look totally realistic. It's sewn together. It's made out of some of the animals in that particular image you mentioned have a particular pattern on the fabric. Or even just for Theodore, I have a lot of times he's got kind of like wrinkles and stuff because, you think of him having, a belly or his arms and legs that are stuffed full of, soft material. How is that different? And how does that react like with the environment, whether he's sitting or standing? Again, like, inanimate object, but children's books, right? He can move around. So yeah, it's a different ball game than it is drawing a real rabbit, which I enjoy drawing as well. So
I also wondered, what are some other inspirations for you? Animals definitely seem like an inspiration, but what really drives you to create, and why children's books?
Why children's books? Because it's what I wanted to do since I was a child myself, honestly. I think probably like 6 years old, I could articulate that I wanted to do that as an adult. And it's been kind of a long, winding journey to get there. My background's in graphic design, but I mean, that still influences what I do, and I am happy to have that skill set. So yeah, it's just, I don't know, I'm the kind of person that's always been driven by one thing and has been going after that for years. I think a lot of children's book authors and illustrators try to tap into their inner child, whether that's, I don't have kids, I don't have a family like that, but, if you are around kids, just kind of soaking that up like a sponge and how they talk and interact, or delving back into childhood memories. That's where this first story came from. And probably this one a little bit with the stuffed animals for sure. And then, yeah, other times it's just like the seed of something gets stuck in the back of my head, and I may not even be consciously thinking about it, but one day it is fully formed enough that I take it to paper, right? And by then you may not even remember exactly where it first started from, but it's been growing back there for a while, so.
What part of the process of creating these narrative stories do you think excites you the most?
Definitely, like, oh gosh, not the planning stuff. I mean, that's so important, right? I am the kind of person that wants to like go straight to the drawing board, and not even, so I do pencil and then watercolor and then pencil again over that to do the details. I like doing the details best. So like kind of like the end polishing point, which sometimes I jump to that a little bit too fast, right? But yeah, that I think for me is the most fun because it starts to come alive on your paper then. It's not just a sketch. It's not just, in a lot of cases with watercolor, something a little bit more amorphous looking that's not fully formed yet. It's putting those details on where the stuffed animals, for example, really start to take shape. It's adding like the little stitch marks, or maybe it's like the bumpy texture of the fabric. And I'm learning as I've been working in children's artwork for, I guess, 2 years now. Even if I do jump ahead to that step, I'm gaining the patience to look at that with a little bit more perspective. Maybe it's literally putting the paper like further away from me and thinking, okay, stop. Like, do you really want to like do the finishing touches on this yet? Or could you do a better job of drawing this character? Is this consistent? Did you put in the planning time to like actually, put things in order and have the character, have agency as they move from one scene to the next? And that's just true of the process for children's book literature, because I wanted it to be a linear process. I thought it would be a linear process, and it's not. And I think maybe you agree with this, Serena, like artwork is, it's just like life. It's messy, right? we just jump around from one thing to the next. So even if I do jump to the end game, you know, I'm still going back to that planning board and I'm rewriting as much as I'm illustrating at the same time. You don't do one exclusively, say the manuscript is perfect and polished, now I'm going to illustrate from page 1 to page 32. It's a little bit of back and forth through the whole process.
And speaking of stories and narratives, can you maybe share with us what some of your favorite stories are, your favorite books, maybe some that are getting you through these recent isolated months?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. Yeah, so maybe like a lot of people, I'm looking for that element of escapism right now. Definitely, old favorites. Definitely, I have been gravitating towards, I guess you know the stuff that you have a sense of nostalgia for. The Runaway Bunny is one that's on the shelf behind me, and I mentioned that one because one of the adult books that I just read was actually letters by the editor Ursula Nordstrom, who worked with Harper Publishers back in the 1950s, and that's one of the books that she edited. So those books and the time that she was working, kind of a little lesson on the history of children's book literature, is known as like the golden age of children's book literature, like when Where the Wild Things came out, Maurice Sendak books. So again, like that sense of nostalgia and looking back, again, of course I wasn't alive in the 1950s, but I still read those books as a kid, right? Because my parents read them. So yeah, I've been looking back at that sort of stuff. And then there's some other newer ones. Speaking of Maurice Sendak, who, even if you don't know the name, everyone knows Where the Wild Things Are, right? He illustrated that book among many, many others. But there's another book that I got recently this spring. If you have kids, or even if you don't, just read it. It's a pleasure. It's called Hungry Jim. But that one was kind of illustrated as a tribute to Maurice Sendak. It has a similar style. And that's a really great story about kind of how to deal with your emotions, which as kids, I think is always something, you know, that's important to know. And as adults too, frankly, right now, I think I've had so many discussions with my adult friends just about, you know, like it's okay to feel grief. It's okay to, frankly, do the opposite of that, which is something that I've kind of struggled with, you know, that I do look for the silver lining, and there's maybe a little bit of guilt associated with, okay, I can still come here and be happy about the work that I'm getting done, even while on the other hand, I'm like listening to the news and hearing stuff that makes me feel the opposite. So yeah, Hungry Jim is a great book too that I've delved into.
Another thing I wanted to ask you, so I really love that you talked about that how to draw series that you did of odd animals. I think in these times, a lot of people are turning to creative pursuits as a way to really not only fill their days, but also excite them and try things that they haven't tried before, but have always wanted to. So what would you say to aspiring illustrators or aspiring artists or people who have wanted to try drawing before, but have just never felt like they could, and now that they have the time are trying it for the first time?
Yeah, this, if you can get in the mindset of taking advantage of the time that you have, which I know can be hard, but if you can get into that headspace and just say, I'm going to use this time, you know, to do that thing that I've always wanted to do, just keep coming back to the drawing board. I think tutorials like that are awesome, and there's so many of them out there. So if the first one you try is, you know, maybe you don't want to draw animals, that's fine. There's so many other ones to take advantage of. And I think, you know, if you're somebody that's hard on yourself and is a perfectionist, which I certainly am, you know, it's an opportunity to kind of let loose a little bit too. I really tried with those videos, first of all, to simplify the style of the animals I was drawing. They definitely look like what's in the book, but again, I had to do it and try to do it like less than 5 minutes or so. And some of that was a little bit easier with some animals than others. But I also tried to emphasize it, you know, like here it is in black and white, how I've drawn it, color it in, here's the color that the animal is, you know, naturally in the wild, but make it your own. So I think just be loose with it and have fun with it. And if you can keep yourself making that a habit, that's when the magic happens. I mean, it's the old adage of practice makes perfect is so true. I mean, I can look back at my work from a year ago or 2 years ago, and it's changed so much. And that's just because I've made the habit and made the discipline to keep coming back to the drawing board. And that's gratifying. So if you have the time, you'll end up with that stack of drawings too, and look back at this time and maybe have something happy come out of that you're proud of, I hope.
Well, that is wonderful advice, Claire. Before we sign off, I just have one final question for you. If anyone's interested in seeing more of your work, or if they want to engage with you at all, what's a good place to go and do that?
Yeah, so if you want to see more of my work, one of two places. You could go to my website, which is simply my name, clairesedovic.com, or again, my name at Instagram. So you can reach out to me, message via Instagram, or you can send me a message on my website as well. So I've got a whole portfolio on my website, and I try and update things on Instagram, add something at least once a week. And all the videos are on both places as well. So you can look at them again.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Claire. It was a joy talking to you. I hope that you stay healthy and keep drawing.
Thanks, Sabrina. So much appreciate your time today.
I love art and I hate my phone. I heard your shining voice and I recall we need art, let's make it known.